She rode 3 days through treacherous mountain trails to save a dying man's life, never imagining that her medical skills would heal more than just his grisly wounds. When Caleb Thorne opened his eyes and declared he wanted to marry his beautiful savior, Rebecca Hayes faced an impossible choice. But what happens when the patient you came to heal refuses to let you leave? The grizzly bear's claws had torn through flesh like paper, and somewhere high in the Montana mountains, a man was dying alone. Rebecca Hayes pressed her boots into her horse's sides, urging the tired animal up another rocky slope as October wind bit through her wool coat. Her medical bag bounced against her hip with each step, filled with medicines that might already be too late to save a life. "Faster, Maple," she whispered to her mare, though she knew the poor animal was already giving everything it had. 3 days of hard riding had brought them deep into territory, where few people dared to go, following a trail that seemed to disappear with every gust of wind. The messenger who had found her in Helena 2 nights ago could barely stand when he stumbled into her clinic. His clothes were torn, his face scratched by pine branches, and his eyes held the wild look of a man who had seen death up close. "Doc Hayes, you gotta come," he had gasped, falling into the chair beside her desk. "There's a mountain man up north, name of Caleb Thorne. Grizzly got him good, real good. Won't last another week without proper doctoring." Rebecca had looked up from the medical journal she was reading, her pen still in her hand. She had heard stories about Caleb Thorne around town, how he could track a wounded elk for 50 miles, how he once survived a winter storm that killed 3 other men, how he lived alone in the wilderness and liked it that way. "How far?" she had asked, already knowing she would go. 3 days hard riding, maybe 4 if the weather turns. Rebecca had closed her journal and stood up. In her 6 years as Montana Territory's only female doctor, she had learned that distance meant nothing when someone needed help. Rich or poor, friendly or mean, close to town or far away, if they needed a doctor, she would come. Now, as Maple's hooves clicked against loose stones and the trail grew steeper, Rebecca wondered what she would find when she finally reached Caleb Thorne's cabin. Would she arrive to save a life? Or would she be too late to do anything but prepare a body for burial? The sun was getting low in the sky, painting the pine trees dark against the orange light. Soon it would be night, and traveling these mountain paths in darkness was asking for trouble. Bears, wolves, and steep drops waited for anyone foolish enough to continue without being able to see where they were going. But somewhere ahead, a man was fighting for his life, and Rebecca Hayes had never turned back from a fight worth winning. She pulled her coat tighter and kept riding into the growing shadows, following a trail that seemed to lead straight into the heart of the wilderness. Behind her, the lights of Helena were just a memory. Ahead, only darkness and the unknown waited. As the first stars appeared overhead, Rebecca began to wonder if she was riding toward her greatest medical challenge, or something else entirely. The mountains held secrets, and she was about to discover that some of them would change her life forever. "Almost there, girl," she told Maple, though she had no idea how much farther they had to go. The trail had become harder to follow as daylight faded, and twice she had to stop and look around to make sure they were still heading in the right direction. Then, through the trees ahead, she saw something that made her heart beat faster. Smoke, thin and gray against the dark sky, rising from somewhere just beyond the next ridge. Someone had a fire burning, which meant someone was still alive to tend it. Rebecca urged Maple forward, hope giving her new energy despite the long day of riding. The trail curved around a large boulder, then opened into a small clearing where a log cabin sat like it had grown right out of the mountainside. Light flickered in the cabin's single window, and more smoke drifted from its stone chimney. But what caught Rebecca's attention was the old man sitting on the front porch, a rifle across his knees and worry written all over his weathered face. "You the doc?" he called out as she rode into the clearing. "I am," Rebecca answered, sliding down from Maple's back. Her legs felt shaky after so many hours in the saddle, but she forced herself to stand straight. "Are you the one who sent for me?" The old man nodded and stood up slowly, like his bones hurt. "Name's Jeremiah Moss. Been looking after Caleb best I can, but..." He shook his head. "Doc, I gotta tell you straight. He's in a bad way. Real bad." Rebecca grabbed her medical bag and followed Jeremiah toward the cabin door. Through the window, she could see the shape of a man lying on a bed, but she couldn't tell if he was breathing or not. "When did it happen?" she asked, her mind already running through everything she might need to do. 5 days ago, Jeremiah answered, pushing open the heavy wooden door. Found him about a mile from here, torn up something fierce. Amazing he made it back to the cabin at all. The smell hit Rebecca as soon as she stepped inside. Blood, sweat, and something else she recognized from her medical training. The smell of a body fighting infection. It was warm in the cabin, almost too warm, with a fire crackling in the stone fireplace and oil lamps burning on rough wooden tables. But all of that faded away when she saw the man on the bed. Caleb Thorne was bigger than she had expected, his shoulders broad even as he lay unconscious. Dark hair stuck to his forehead with sweat, and his breathing was quick and shallow. But it was the wounds across his chest and arms that made Rebecca's breath catch in her throat. 4 long tears in his flesh, each one deep enough to show the muscle underneath. The edges were red and swollen, and she could see that infection had already begun to set in. Any ordinary man would have died days ago from wounds like these. "Has he been awake at all?" she asked, setting her bag on the table and opening it quickly. "Off and on," Jeremiah said. "Talks sometimes, but it don't make much sense. Keeps asking for water and calling out names I don't recognize." Rebecca rolled up her sleeves and moved to the bed. This close, she could see that Caleb's face was flushed with fever, and when she touched his forehead, his skin felt hot as a stove. "I'm going to need clean water. Lots of it," she said. "And clean cloth for bandages. Do you have any whiskey?" "Got a bottle," Jeremiah answered. "Why?" "Because this is going to hurt, even if he's not awake to feel it." Rebecca had treated grizzly attacks before, but never ones this severe on a patient who had survived this long. As she began to clean the wounds, she found herself wondering what kind of man Caleb Thorne really was. The stories she had heard in town painted him as someone who was more comfortable with wild animals than with people, someone who had chosen the mountains over civilization. Now, looking at his face in the lamplight, she saw something different, even unconscious and hurt. He looked strong, not just in his body, but in some deeper way that she couldn't quite put into words. "Is he going to make it, Doc?" Jeremiah asked quietly. Rebecca didn't answer right away. She had learned long ago that predicting who would live and who would die was harder than people thought. She had seen strong men die from small cuts and weak ones survive terrible injuries. But as she worked to clean and bandage Caleb's wounds, something told her that this man was different. Maybe it was the way his body seemed to be fighting the infection even as she watched. Maybe it was something else entirely. "I don't know," she finally said. "But I'm going to do everything I can to find out." Outside, the wind picked up, making the cabin walls creak and the fire dance in the fireplace. Rebecca worked through the night, cleaning wounds, forcing medicine between Caleb's lips, and checking his breathing every few minutes. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice wondered what would happen if he lived. What kind of man would wake up from injuries like these? And what would he think of the woman who had ridden 3 days through dangerous territory to save his life? But those were questions for later. Right now, all that mattered was keeping Caleb Thorne alive until morning, and hoping that would be enough. Morning came too soon and not soon enough. Rebecca had dozed in the wooden chair beside Caleb's bed, jerking awake every time his breathing changed or he made a sound. Her neck ached, her back was stiff, and her eyes felt full of sand. But Caleb Thorne was still alive. "How's he doing?" Jeremiah asked softly, setting a cup of coffee on the table beside her. Rebecca stood up slowly, her muscles protesting after the uncomfortable night. She checked Caleb's forehead, still hot, but maybe not quite as burning as before. His breathing seemed a little easier too, though she didn't want to hope too much. "Better, I think," she said, taking a sip of the coffee. It was strong and bitter, exactly what she needed. The fever might be breaking. She had changed his bandages twice during the night, and each time the wounds looked a little less angry. The red swelling was going down, and there was no sign of the green infection that would mean certain death. "You did good work, Doc," Jeremiah said, settling into another chair with his own cup of coffee. "I wasn't sure anybody could help him." Rebecca moved back to the bed and lifted one of the bandages carefully. What she saw made her blink in surprise. The wound that had been deep and ragged just hours before now looked pink and healthy. The edges were coming together, and new skin was already starting to form. "That's not possible," she whispered. "What's not possible?" Jeremiah asked, leaning forward. "This healing. It's too fast. Nobody heals this quickly from wounds like these. She checked the other bandages, finding the same thing. All 4 claw marks were healing at a rate that should have taken weeks, not hours. In all her years of medical training and practice, she had never seen anything like it. Maybe he's just tough, Jeremiah suggested. Tougher than should be humanly possible, Rebecca muttered, but she was smiling as she said it. Whatever was happening, it meant Caleb Thorne was going to live. As if he had heard her thoughts, Caleb's eyes fluttered open. Rebecca froze, her hand still holding a bandage. Dark brown eyes looked up at her, confused at first, then focusing with surprising sharpness for someone who had been unconscious for days. "Water," he said, his voice rough as sandpaper. Rebecca grabbed the water pitcher from the table and poured some into a cup. She slipped her arm under Caleb's shoulders to help him sit up enough to drink, surprised by how solid and warm he felt. He drank the whole cup without stopping, then looked at her again. This time, she could see intelligence in his eyes, and something that might have been curiosity. "You're the doctor," he said. Not a question, just a statement said in a voice that was used to being right about things. "I am," Rebecca answered. "My name is Rebecca Hayes. How do you feel?" A smile tugged at the corner of Caleb's mouth. "Like I fought a grizzly and lost." "You didn't lose," Rebecca said, checking his pulse. It was strong and steady, much better than it had been all night. "You're alive, thanks to you." His eyes followed her movements as she worked, and she found herself aware of how she must look after riding for 3 days and staying up all night. Her hair had come loose from its careful bun, her dress was wrinkled, and she probably had dark circles under her eyes. But when she glanced at Caleb, he wasn't looking at her like she was a mess. He was looking at her like she was something interesting, something worth paying attention to. "Don't thank me yet," she said, trying to keep her voice professional. "You're not out of danger. Wounds like yours can turn bad quickly if they're not cared for properly." "Then I guess you'll have to stay and make sure they don't," Caleb said. There was something in the way he said it that made Rebecca's cheeks feel warm. She turned away and busied herself with organizing her medical supplies. "I'll stay until I'm sure you're going to recover completely," she said. "Then I need to get back to Helena. I have other patients who need me." "Of course you do," Caleb said, but his voice had changed somehow. It sounded almost disappointed. Jeremiah cleared his throat from his chair by the fire. "Doc, you might want to look outside before you start making plans to leave." Rebecca walked to the cabin's single window and pushed aside the rough curtain. What she saw made her heart sink. Snow was falling. Not the light, pretty kind that dusted the ground and melted by afternoon, but thick, heavy flakes that meant business. "How long does snow like this usually last?" she asked. "Could be days, could be weeks," Jeremiah said. "When winter decides to come to these mountains, it doesn't ask permission first." Rebecca stared out at the white curtain falling between the trees. She had planned to stay just long enough to make sure Caleb was stable, then ride back to Helena and her normal life. Now it looked like the mountains had other ideas. "I have to get back," she said, more to herself than to the 2 men. "Mrs. Henderson is expecting her baby any day now, and old Mr. Patterson needs his heart medicine every week. Mountain doesn't care about your schedule," Caleb said from the bed. His voice was stronger now, with a hint of something that might have been amusement. "Storm like this? You try to leave now. You'll freeze to death before you make it 5 miles. Rebecca turned back to face him, frustrated by how calm he sounded about the whole situation. "So, what am I supposed to do? Just wait here until spring? Could be worse places to wait," Caleb said. And this time she was sure she heard amusement in his voice. "Easy for you to say. You live here." "True enough," Caleb agreed. "But I don't usually have such interesting company." Rebecca felt her cheeks warm again and turned back to the window to hide it. Outside, the snow was falling even harder, and she could barely see the trees that she knew were just a few yards away. "Storm should blow itself out in a few days," Jeremiah said kindly. "These early ones usually don't last too long." But even as he said it, Rebecca could see the doubt in his eyes. She had lived in Montana territory long enough to know that mountain weather did whatever it wanted, whenever it wanted to do it. She was trapped, at least for now, in a small cabin with 2 men she barely knew. One was a kind old hermit who seemed harmless enough. The other was a mountain man with dark eyes that seemed to see right through her, a man who was healing impossibly fast from wounds that should have killed him. And for reasons she didn't want to think about too carefully, the idea of being trapped with Caleb Thorne didn't frighten her nearly as much as it should have. "Well then," she said, turning back to face the room with as much professional dignity as she could manage. "I guess we'd better make the best of it." Caleb smiled at her then, a real smile that lit up his whole face and made him look younger and less dangerous. "I was hoping you'd say that." Rebecca spent the rest of the morning checking and rechecking his wounds, amazed by how quickly they continued to heal. By afternoon, what had looked like mortal injuries the night before were pink scars that looked weeks old. "I've never seen anything like this," she told Jeremiah while Caleb dozed. "It's like his body knows some secret about healing that mine don't." "Maybe it does," Jeremiah said mysteriously. "Some folks are just different that way." "Different how?" But Jeremiah just smiled and went back to stirring the pot of stew he was making for dinner, leaving Rebecca with more questions than answers. Outside, the snow kept falling, and Rebecca began to realize that her carefully planned life was about to take a turn she had never expected. She just didn't know yet how big a turn it would be, or how much she would like the new direction. As evening approached and Caleb woke up again, looking even stronger than before, he caught her watching him and smiled. "Something on your mind, Doc? Just wondering how long it's going to take you to be completely healed," she said. "Why? Getting tired of my company already?" "No," Rebecca said, then stopped, surprised by her own honesty. "No, I'm not." And that, she realized, might be the biggest surprise of all. By the third day, Caleb Thorne was standing up and walking around the cabin like he hadn't been dying just days before. Rebecca watched him move to the window, his steps sure and steady, and shook her head in amazement. "You should still be in bed," she said, folding the bandages she had just removed from his chest. The wounds were now nothing more than thin pink lines, barely visible unless you knew where to look. "Should be a lot of things," Caleb replied, looking out at the snow that continued to fall. "But I've never been good at doing what I should." The storm had been going for 3 days now, showing no signs of stopping. What had started as a minor delay was becoming something bigger, a real problem that could keep them trapped until the spring thaw. Rebecca tried not to think about what that would mean for her practice in Helena, or for the patients who counted on her. "How much food do we have?" she asked Jeremiah, who was sitting by the fire working on some kind of wood carving. "Enough for winter if we're careful," the old man answered. "Caleb always keeps the cabin well stocked. Never know when you might get snowed in up here." "Winter?" Rebecca felt her stomach drop. "It's only October." "Mountain winter," Caleb said, turning from the window. "Starts when it wants to, ends when it's good and ready. Could be November, before this breaks. Could be December." Rebecca sank into a chair, the full weight of her situation finally hitting her. She had patients depending on her, a practice she had worked years to build, a life she had carefully planned and organized. Now all of that was disappearing under an endless blanket of snow. "Hey," Caleb said softly, moving to sit across from her. "You okay? I have people counting on me," she said, surprised by how shaky her voice sounded. "Mrs. Henderson could have her baby any day. Mr. Patterson's heart condition needs constant monitoring. There are miners in the camps who get hurt and have no one else to help them. And you think you're the only person who can help them?" Rebecca looked up sharply. "I'm the only doctor for 50 miles. Maybe. But you're not the only person who cares." Caleb leaned forward, his dark eyes serious. "Sometimes other people step up when they have to. Sometimes being needed isn't the same thing as being the only one who can help." The words stung because they felt too close to something Rebecca didn't want to examine. Had she built her life around being needed because she was afraid nobody would want her any other way? "That's easy for you to say," she shot back. "You chose to live away from people. I chose to dedicate my life to helping them. Did you choose it, or did it choose you?" Before Rebecca could answer, a loud crack echoed through the cabin. All 3 of them froze, listening. "Tree branch," Jeremiah said after a moment. "Heavy snow will do that." But the sound had reminded them all of how isolated they were, how far from help if something went wrong. The cabin suddenly felt smaller, the storm outside more threatening. "I should check the roof," Caleb said, standing up. "Make sure the weight of the snow isn't causing problems." "You just recovered from grizzly wounds," Rebecca protested. "You shouldn't be climbing around on roofs." Caleb smiled, and Rebecca noticed again how it changed his whole face. Doc, I appreciate the concern, but I've been taking care of myself in these mountains for 15 years. I think I can handle a little roof work. He pulled on a heavy coat and stepped outside, leaving Rebecca and Jeremiah alone by the fire. The old man looked up from his carving. She could see now that it was a small bird, delicate and detailed. He's not what you expected, is he? Jeremiah asked. What do you mean? Caleb, when you heard mountain man, you probably pictured someone rough, maybe not too bright. Someone who chose the wilderness because he couldn't handle civilization. Rebecca felt her cheeks warm. That was exactly what she had pictured. He's got books, Jeremiah continued, nodding toward a shelf Rebecca hadn't noticed before. Real books. Philosophy, poetry, history, reads them all, thinks about them too, could probably discuss Plato with any professor back east. Rebecca followed his gaze to the bookshelf. Even from across the room, she could see titles that surprised her. Volumes of Shakespeare, Emerson's essays, scientific journals. Then why does he live out here alone? Maybe you should ask him that yourself. The door opened then, bringing a swirl of snow and cold air as Caleb came back inside. He stamped his boots and brushed snow from his coat before hanging it on a peg by the door. Roof's holding fine, he reported. But this storm's not letting up anytime soon. As if to prove his point, the wind picked up outside, howling around the cabin and making the walls creak. Rebecca shivered despite the warmth from the fireplace. Getting colder too, Caleb added, moving to add another log to the fire. Temperature drops much more. We'll need to be careful about keeping the fire going all night. How cold does it get? Rebecca asked. Cold enough to kill you if you're not prepared for it. The simple statement sent a chill through Rebecca that had nothing to do with the weather. She was completely dependent on these two men now, trapped in a situation she had no experience with. All her medical training, all her education, all her careful planning meant nothing against the raw power of a mountain storm. You're scared, Caleb observed, settling into his chair. I'm concerned, Rebecca corrected. Nothing wrong with being scared. Fear keeps you alive up here. I'm not used to being helpless. Nobody is. But there's a difference between being helpless and being out of control. Caleb leaned back, studying her face. You spend a lot of time being in control, don't you? I have to. People's lives depend on the decisions I make. Must be exhausting. Rebecca opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. It was exhausting. Every day brought decisions that could mean the difference between life and death for her patients. Every choice carried weight. Every mistake could be fatal. Sometimes, she admitted. What made you want to be a doctor? Jeremiah asked, looking up from his carving again. My father was a doctor. He died when I was 12, during a cholera outbreak. He could have left town, could have protected himself, but he stayed to help people who had no one else. Rebecca stared into the fire, remembering. I decided then that I wanted to be like him. Noble, Caleb said, but something in his tone made her look at him sharply. You don't think so? I think 12-year-old girls make decisions for 12-year-old reasons. Question is whether the grown woman still believes in them. Of course I do. Do you? Or do you just think you should? Before Rebecca could answer, another loud crack echoed outside, this one followed by a crash that shook the whole cabin. All three of them were on their feet instantly. That was bigger than a branch, Jeremiah said grimly. Caleb was already putting his coat back on. Could be a whole tree. I need to check the damage. I'm coming with you, Rebecca said, reaching for her own coat. No, you're not. Storm like this, you step outside without knowing what you're doing. You could get turned around and lost 10 feet from the door. I'm not helpless, Rebecca snapped. Nobody said you were. But being capable doesn't mean being stupid. Caleb's voice was firm but not unkind. Let me handle what I know how to handle. He was gone before she could argue, leaving Rebecca frustrated and angry. She wasn't used to being told she couldn't do something. Wasn't used to having to depend on someone else's judgment. He's right, you know, Jeremiah said quietly. About what? About the danger. Mountain storms kill people who think they know better than the mountain does. Rebecca paced to the window, but she couldn't see anything through the swirling snow. Somewhere out there, Caleb was checking for damage, making sure they were safe. She should be grateful, but instead she felt frustrated by her own helplessness. I hate this, she said. Hate what? Not being able to help. Not being useful. You saved his life, Jeremiah pointed out. That was pretty useful. That was my job. That's what I'm trained for. And this is what he's trained for. Maybe it's okay to let someone else be useful for a while. The door opened again, and Caleb came back inside, his face serious. Good news and bad news, he said, hanging up his coat. Good news is the cabin's fine. Bad news is a big pine came down across the trail. Even when this storm ends, we won't be going anywhere until we can clear it. How long will that take? Rebecca asked. Depends on the tree. Could be days, could be weeks. Rebecca felt something crumble inside her chest. Not just her plans, not just her schedule, but something deeper. The careful structure she had built her life around was falling apart, just like the tree outside. Hey, Caleb said, moving closer. You're going to be okay. We all are. How can you be so calm about this? Because getting upset won't change anything. The storm will end when it ends. The tree will get cleared when it gets cleared. Getting angry at things you can't control just makes you miserable. Easy philosophy when you chose to live this way. Who says I chose it? Rebecca looked at him sharply. There was something in his voice she hadn't heard before, something that sounded almost like pain. But before she could ask what he meant, Jeremiah stood up and stretched. Well, if we're going to be here a while, we might as well make the best of it, the old man said. How about some dinner? As they settled around the rough table to eat Jeremiah's venison stew, Rebecca found herself watching Caleb in the flickering lamplight. There were depths to him she hadn't expected, questions she wanted to ask but wasn't sure she had the right to. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the mountains, but inside the cabin, something else was stirring. Something that had nothing to do with the weather and everything to do with the way Caleb's eyes met hers across the table, holding her gaze just a moment longer than necessary. Rebecca Hayes had come to these mountains to save a life. She was beginning to wonder if she might end up saving her own. The morning brought silence so complete it woke Rebecca from the deepest sleep she'd had in years. No wind howling, no snow pelting the windows, no creaking walls fighting against the storm. Just perfect, crystalline quiet that made her ears ring. She sat up in the narrow bed Jeremiah had made for her in the corner of the cabin, her breath visible in small puffs. The fire had burned low during the night, and the temperature inside had dropped enough to make her pull the thick wool blankets tighter around her shoulders. Across the room, Caleb was already awake, sitting on the edge of his bed and looking toward the window. Even in the dim light, she could see the alertness in his posture, the way he held his head like he was listening for something. Storm's over, he said quietly without looking at her. Rebecca slipped out of bed and padded to the window in her stocking feet. What she saw outside made her gasp. The world had been transformed into something from a fairy tale. Everything covered in pristine white snow that sparkled like diamonds in the early morning light. Trees bent under the weight of it, their branches creating a lace-like pattern against the pale sky. It's beautiful, she whispered. And dangerous, Caleb added, coming to stand beside her. That much snow means avalanche conditions on the slopes, unstable ground, and cold that can freeze your lungs if you breathe too deep. But Rebecca wasn't thinking about danger right now. She was thinking about how the morning light coming through the window lit up Caleb's face, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the unexpected gentleness in his dark eyes. How deep do you think it is? She asked, trying to focus on something safer than the way he smelled like pine and wood smoke. 3 feet, maybe 4. Deep enough to make travel impossible even if we could get past that fallen tree. Jeremiah stirred from his bed near the fireplace, sitting up with a groan and rubbing his back. Getting too old for sleeping on the floor, he muttered, then looked toward the window. Well, would you look at that? Mother Nature decided to redecorate. How long before it melts enough for travel? Rebecca asked. Depends on the temperature, Caleb said. Could be days, could be weeks. This high up? Sometimes snow doesn't melt until spring. Rebecca felt her heart sink. Christmas was still 2 months away, but already she was missing it. Missing her patience, her orderly life, her sense of purpose and control. I need to get a message to Helena somehow, she said. Let people know I'm alive, that I'm stuck but safe. Nearest telegraph is in Butte, Jeremiah said, building up the fire. 100 miles south through some of the worst country you can imagine. Then I'll have to go myself, once the snow clears enough. No, you won't. Caleb's voice was firm. You try to make that trip without experience in winter travel, you'll die before you make it 10 miles. So, what am I supposed to do? Just disappear? Let people think I'm dead? People will figure out you got caught in the storm, Caleb said. Happens all the time up here. They'll know you're probably safe somewhere, waiting for spring. You don't understand. I have responsibilities. I understand plenty. Something had changed in Caleb's voice, made it harder. I understand you think the world stops turning if you're not there to push it. Rebecca turned to face him, anger flaring. That's not fair, isn't it? You've been here 4 days, and every conversation comes back to how important you are somewhere else, how much people need you, how you can't possibly be spared from your great work. It is important work, never said it wasn't. But maybe it's not the only important work in the world. What's that supposed to mean? Caleb moved away from the window, running his hands through his dark hair. Forget it. Let's just get some breakfast. But Rebecca wasn't ready to drop it. No, tell me what you meant. You really want to know? Caleb turned back to her, his eyes flashing. I think you use that doctor badge like a shield. As long as you're busy saving everyone else, you don't have to think about what you might be missing in your own life. I'm not missing anything. When's the last time you had a friend who wasn't a patient? When's the last time you did something just because it made you happy, not because someone needed you to do it? Rebecca opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. The questions hit closer to home than she wanted to admit. That's what I thought, Caleb said. But his voice was gentler now. Look, I'm not saying your work isn't important, but maybe being stuck here isn't the worst thing that could happen to you. And maybe you don't know anything about my life. Rebecca shot back. Maybe I don't. But I know something about running away from things, and I recognize the signs. I'm not running away from anything. No? Then why did you become a doctor in a territory where being a female doctor means you'll always be fighting for respect? Why choose the hardest possible path? Because people need help. Lots of people need help. You could have stayed back east, worked in a hospital where you'd have support and resources. Instead, you came out here where you have to prove yourself over and over again to people who don't want to accept you. Rebecca stared at him, shaken by how clearly he seemed to see through her carefully constructed reasons. What's your point? My point is that maybe you chose the hardest path because it keeps you too busy to think about what else you might want from life. Before Rebecca could respond, Jeremiah cleared his throat loudly. You two want to continue this argument? Or should I start cooking breakfast? The interruption broke the tension, leaving Rebecca and Caleb standing on opposite sides of the cabin, both breathing hard, like they'd been in a physical fight instead of a verbal one. Breakfast sounds good, Rebecca said finally, not looking at Caleb. But as Jeremiah began preparing eggs and bacon over the fire, Rebecca found herself thinking about Caleb's words. Was he right? Had she chosen her difficult path not just to help people, but to avoid dealing with her own wants and needs? The thought was uncomfortable enough that she pushed it away and focused on helping Jeremiah with the cooking. But she could feel Caleb watching her, and somehow she knew the conversation wasn't over. After breakfast, Caleb announced he was going outside to check the damage from the storm and start working on clearing a path to the woodpile. Rebecca offered to help, but he shook his head. Snow's too deep. You just slow me down. The words stung, even though Rebecca knew he was probably right. She watched from the window as he strapped on a pair of wooden snowshoes and began the slow, difficult work of breaking a trail through the deep snow. He's not trying to hurt your feelings, Jeremiah said, coming to stand beside her. I know that. Do you? Because you look like someone who just got told she's not needed. Rebecca sighed. Maybe because that's how I feel. Feeling useless? Feeling unimportant, I guess. My whole life is built around being the person people turn to when they need help. Take that away. And what am I? Jeremiah was quiet for a long moment, watching Caleb work outside. Can I tell you something about him? What? He wasn't always a mountain man. Used to be a teacher back in Ohio. Had a wife, a little girl, a house in town. Thought he had his whole life figured out. Rebecca turned to stare at the old man. What happened? Fever swept through the town. Scarlet fever. Took his wife and daughter both, along with half the kids he taught. He tried to save them, tried everything he could think of, but nothing worked. Rebecca felt her heart clench. That's terrible. Worst part was, people blamed him. Said if he'd been a better teacher, he would have noticed the signs earlier. If he'd been a better husband and father, he would have protected his family better. Town turned on him, made him feel like their deaths were his fault. So he came here. Came here to get away from people who needed someone to blame. Figured if he didn't care about anyone, he couldn't fail them. Rebecca looked back out the window at Caleb, seeing him differently now. The isolation she had assumed was a choice born of independence was actually a choice born of pain. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because maybe you're not the only one who uses their work as a shield," Jeremiah said. "Maybe you're not the only one who's afraid of what might happen if you let yourself want something more than just being needed." As if he could feel them watching, Caleb looked up from his work and caught Rebecca's eye through the window. For a moment, their gazes held, and she saw something in his face that made her breath catch, a loneliness that matched her own, a question that maybe they could answer together. Then he looked away and went back to his work, leaving Rebecca with the uncomfortable realization that maybe being trapped in this cabin was going to teach her more about herself than she wanted to learn. "Storm's over outside," Jeremiah said quietly. "Question is, what about the storm inside?" Rebecca didn't have an answer for that. But as she watched Caleb work his way through the snow, strong and sure and completely comfortable in this wild place, she began to wonder what it would be like to have someone in her life who didn't need her to save them, but who might want her to stay anyway. It was a dangerous thought, and she tried to push it away. But like the snow outside, it seemed determined to stick around whether she wanted it to or not. 3 riders appeared through the snow like ghosts from Rebecca's past, their horses steaming in the cold mountain air as they approached the cabin. Rebecca dropped the wood she was carrying and ran toward them, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and fear. "Dr. Hayes!" The lead rider pulled off his hat, revealing the worried face of Sheriff Martinez from Helena. "Thank God you're alive. We've been searching for over a week." Behind him rode 2 men Rebecca recognized, Tom Baker, who owned the general store, and Dr. William Hendricks, an older physician who had arrived in Helena just months before she'd left for the mountains. "Sheriff Martinez," Rebecca breathed, relief flooding through her. "How did you find me?" "Tracked the messenger who came for you. Followed his path as far as we could before the storm hit. Been waiting for it to clear so we could keep looking." The sheriff dismounted, his legs stiff from the long ride. "Whole town's been worried sick." Caleb emerged from the cabin, moving with the quiet alertness Rebecca had come to recognize. His eyes swept over the 3 visitors, taking in their weapons, their posture, the way they positioned themselves around Rebecca. "You must be the mountain man," Dr. Hendricks said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being the most important person in any room. "I'm Dr. William Hendricks. I've come to take over Dr. Hayes' care and escort her safely back to town." "Nobody needs taking over," Caleb replied mildly, but Rebecca caught the edge in his voice. "She's been doing fine on her own." "I'm sure she has, but this is no place for a lady, especially not for weeks at a time." Dr. Hendricks smiled the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The people of Helena need their doctor back where she belongs." Rebecca felt something twist in her stomach at those words, "where she belongs." A week ago, she would have agreed without question. Now, standing in the snow outside a rough cabin, where she had found something she couldn't quite name, the words felt like a cage closing around her. "How are my patients?" she asked. "Mrs. Henderson? Mr. Patterson?" "Mrs. Henderson delivered a healthy baby boy," Tom Baker said with a grin. "Dr. Hendricks was there to help. Did a fine job, too. And Mr. Patterson's heart condition has been well managed," Dr. Hendricks added. "I've been able to handle all your patients quite adequately." The words should have made Rebecca feel relieved. Instead, they made her feel strangely empty, as if something important had been taken away from her while she wasn't looking. "That's wonderful," she said, but even she could hear the flatness in her own voice. "Of course, everyone will be glad to have you back," Sheriff Martinez said quickly. "Town's not the same without you, Doc." Jeremiah appeared in the cabin doorway, taking in the scene with sharp eyes. "Lot of trouble to go to, tracking someone through mountain snow," he observed. "Dr. Hayes is an important member of our community," Dr. Hendricks said. "We couldn't just leave her stranded in the wilderness." "Didn't look stranded to me," Jeremiah muttered, but loudly enough for everyone to hear. An uncomfortable silence settled over the group. Rebecca found herself caught between 2 worlds, the life she had built in Helena, represented by these men who had risked their own safety to find her, and the strange new possibilities she had begun to glimpse in this remote cabin. "We should head back soon as possible," Sheriff Martinez said. "Weather could turn again any time, and the trail's going to be hard enough as it is." Today? Rebecca asked, surprised by how the thought made her panic. Better to travel while conditions are good, Dr. Hendricks agreed. I've brought supplies and an extra horse. We can have you back in Helena by tomorrow night. Rebecca looked at Caleb, who was watching the whole scene with an unreadable expression. Their eyes met for just a moment, and she saw something there that made her chest feel tight. I need to pack my things, she said. Of course, Dr. Hendricks said. Take your time. But as Rebecca walked toward the cabin, she could hear him talking to the other men, in a voice he probably thought was too quiet for her to catch. Terrible thing. Leaving a refined woman alone in a place like this could have been a disaster. Lucky nothing worse happened. What do you mean, nothing worse? Tom Baker asked. Well, you know how these mountain men are. Rough types, not used to proper society. A woman alone with them for weeks. Dr. Hendricks let the implication hang in the air. Rebecca stopped walking, anger flaring hot in her chest. She turned around to face the group. Nothing worse than what? She asked, her voice deadly quiet. Dr. Hendricks had the grace to look embarrassed. I simply meant that it's not appropriate for a lady of your standing to be living in such primitive conditions. These men saved my life, Rebecca said, her voice getting stronger. They shared their food, their shelter, their knowledge. They treated me with nothing but respect and kindness. I'm sure they did, my dear. But don't call me my dear, Rebecca snapped. And don't you dare suggest that being here was somehow improper or dangerous. The men all looked uncomfortable now, shuffling their feet in the snow. Only Caleb seemed unmoved, watching Rebecca with something that might have been pride in his eyes. Dr. Hayes, Sheriff Martinez said diplomatically, nobody's suggesting anything inappropriate happened. We're just glad you're safe and ready to come home. Home. The word hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Was Helena really home? Or had home become something else? Something she was about to lose? Of course, she said finally. Let me get my things. Inside the cabin, Rebecca moved mechanically, folding her clothes and packing her medical supplies. But her hands were shaking, and she found herself moving slower than necessary, as if delaying the inevitable. You don't have to go, Caleb said quietly from behind her. She turned to find him standing in the doorway, his face serious. What do you mean? I mean you're a grown woman. You can make your own choices about where you want to be. I have responsibilities. Sounds like Dr. Hendricks has been handling those just fine. The truth of that statement stung more than Rebecca wanted to admit. I can't just abandon my practice, my patients, my whole life. Can't you? Or won't you? Rebecca stared at him, seeing the challenge in his dark eyes. What are you asking me? I'm asking what you want, Rebecca. Not what you think you should do. Not what other people expect, but what you actually want. It was the question she had been avoiding for days, maybe for years. What did she want? I want, she started, then stopped. The words felt too big, too dangerous. You want what? I want to feel like I matter for who I am, not just what I can do for other people, she whispered. Caleb stepped closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes. You matter to me. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're brave enough to ride 3 days alone to help a stranger. I know you're smart enough to save a man who should have died. I know you're strong enough to handle being trapped in a cabin with 2 rough mountain men without losing your dignity or your kindness. Caleb, I know you make me want things I thought I'd given up on forever. The words hung between them like a bridge she was afraid to cross. Outside, she could hear Dr. Hendricks talking about the importance of getting back to civilization, about the impropriety of the whole situation. They're waiting for me, she said weakly. Let them wait. This is your choice, Rebecca. Yours alone. She looked around the small cabin that had become more of a home in 2 weeks than her house in Helena had ever felt. She thought about the conversations by the fire, the quiet mornings, the sense of belonging she had found in this unlikely place. Then she thought about her practice, her reputation, the life she had worked so hard to build. I can't, she said finally. I have obligations. Something flickered across Caleb's face. Disappointment, maybe. Or resignation. I know. I just hoped. Hoped what? That maybe you were ready to stop running toward things that would never really satisfy you. The words cut deep because they felt true. But Rebecca had spent too many years building her life around duty and responsibility to abandon it all now. no matter what her heart might be telling her. "I have to go," she said, picking up her medical bag. "I know you do," Caleb said quietly. "But Rebecca, the offer stands. If you ever decide you want something different from life, you know where to find me." As Rebecca walked toward the door, every step felt like walking away from a part of herself she was just beginning to understand. But she had made her choice, and now she would have to live with it. The question was whether she would be able to live with herself. The ride back to Helena stretched longer than any journey Rebecca had ever taken, each mile pulling her further from something she couldn't name but desperately didn't want to lose. Dr. Hendricks rode beside her, filling the silence with talk about medical advances and his plans for expanding the practice, while Sheriff Martinez and Tom Baker discussed town business behind them. "I've been thinking we should set up a proper hospital," Dr. Hendricks was saying. "Nothing fancy, mind you, but something more organized than these house calls and makeshift clinics." Rebecca nodded automatically, but her mind kept drifting back to the cabin. She wondered what Caleb was doing right now, whether he and Jeremiah were sitting by the fire, whether they were talking about her. "Of course, it would mean some changes to how you've been doing things, Dr. 21, Hendricks continued. "More structured schedules, better record keeping. I know you've been doing your best out here alone, but there's only so much one person can accomplish without proper support." Something in his tone made Rebecca look at him more carefully. "What kind of changes?" "Well, for instance, these long trips into the mountains to treat isolated cases. Very dangerous, as we've seen. Much better to have patients come to us, or send someone more suited to wilderness travel." "You mean, send a man?" Dr. Hendricks smiled, the kind of smile that made Rebecca's teeth ache. "I mean, send someone with the proper experience and physical capability for such demanding work. I've been making those trips for 6 years without any problems. Until now. And honestly, Dr. Hayes, a woman of your refinement shouldn't have to endure such hardships. There are plenty of ways to practice medicine without putting yourself in danger." Rebecca felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Are you trying to tell me how to run my practice?" "Not at all. I'm simply suggesting we work together to create something better, more efficient. You have wonderful skills with women and children, natural instincts for that kind of care. Leave the dangerous cases to me." The words hit Rebecca like a slap. Women and children. The safe cases. The ones that wouldn't require her to travel or take risks or do anything that might be considered inappropriate for a lady. "I see," she said quietly. But she was beginning to see more than Dr. Hendricks realized. She was seeing her future in Helena. A future where she would be a junior partner in her own practice, relegated to the easier cases while the real doctoring was done by someone else. That night, they camped in a sheltered valley still half a day's ride from town. Rebecca sat by the fire, staring into the flames and thinking about the conversation she'd had with Caleb about running away from things. Maybe he had been right. Maybe she had chosen the hardest path, not just to help people, but to prove something to herself and the world. But now it seemed like even that path was being taken away from her. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Sheriff Martinez settled beside her with a cup of coffee. "Just thinking about getting back to work," Rebecca said. "Must be nice, having Dr. Hendricks there to help now. Take some of the burden off your shoulders." Rebecca studied the sheriff's weathered face in the firelight. "Do you think I need help, Sheriff? Do you think I haven't been doing a good job on my own?" "Course not, Doc. You've been doing fine work, but—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Thing is, folks have been worried about you. Woman alone, traveling to dangerous places, taking on cases that might be too much for anyone really. But especially for a woman." Sheriff Martinez shifted uncomfortably. "People care about you, Doc. They don't want to see you get hurt. And they think the best way to keep me safe is to keep me from doing my job. They think the best way to keep you safe is to make sure you don't have to do the dangerous parts of your job alone." Rebecca stared into the fire, understanding finally dawning. This wasn't about her safety or her capabilities. This was about the town's discomfort with having a woman who operated outside the normal boundaries of what was considered proper. They had tolerated it when she was their only option, but now that Dr. Hendricks was here, they could have their female doctor safely contained within acceptable limits. "What if I don't want to be kept safe?" she asked. "Then I'd say you've been spending too much time in the mountains," Sheriff Martinez replied with a laugh that didn't sound entirely humorous. The next morning brought them within sight of Helena. and Rebecca felt her heart sink at the familiar buildings rising from the valley floor. Everything looked exactly the same. The main street with its wooden sidewalks, the church steeple pointing toward gray clouds, the houses neat and orderly behind their white picket fences. But something had changed, and Rebecca realized it was her. The woman who had ridden out of this town 3 weeks ago would have been relieved to see it again. The woman riding back felt like she was returning to a prison. "There she is," Tom Baker said with satisfaction. "Home, sweet home." Home. There was that word again, and it still didn't feel right. They rode down Main Street, and Rebecca could see people stopping their activities to wave and call out greetings. Mrs. Henderson emerged from the mercantile with her new baby bundled in her arms, beaming as she saw Rebecca approach. "Dr. Hayes, thank heavens you're back safely." Rebecca forced a smile and waved back, but the gesture felt hollow. These people were genuinely glad to see her. She knew that, but she also knew they would be just as happy to see her safely tucked away in a more appropriate role. "Quite a welcoming committee," Dr. Hendricks observed. "You can see how much they've missed you." But what Rebecca could see was how quickly they had adapted to her absence. The town had functioned just fine without her. Dr. Hendricks had handled the medical emergencies. Other people had stepped up to fill the gaps. Life had gone on. Maybe Caleb had been right about that too. Maybe being needed wasn't the same thing as being indispensable. They stopped in front of Rebecca's small house, and she slid down from her horse with legs that felt unsteady. Everything looked exactly as she had left it. The neat garden, the painted shutters, the small sign by the door that read, "Dr. Rebecca Hayes, Physician." "I'll help you get settled," Dr. Hendricks said, reaching for her medical bag. "That's not necessary," Rebecca said quickly. "I can manage." "Nonsense. Besides, we need to discuss how we're going to coordinate our practices. I have some ideas about scheduling that I think you'll find very helpful." Rebecca wanted to tell him that she didn't want his help with scheduling, that she had been managing her practice just fine without coordination. But the words stuck in her throat, held back by years of being polite and accommodating. Inside her house, everything felt strange and small after the rustic spaciousness of the mountain cabin. The careful decorations, the orderly shelves, the precise arrangement of furniture, it all felt like it belonged to someone else. "Very nice," Dr. Hendricks said, looking around approvingly. "I can see you have excellent taste. Very feminine and refined." Rebecca winced at the word feminine, especially the way he said it, like it was a limitation rather than simply a fact. "Now then," he continued, settling into her best chair without being invited, "let's talk about how we're going to divide the patient load. I've been thinking that the best approach would be for you to handle the routine cases, women's ailments, children's checkups, minor injuries. I'll take on the surgical cases, the emergency calls, anything that requires travel to remote locations." "I see." Rebecca remained standing, her hands clenched at her sides. "And what makes you think that's the best arrangement?" "Experience, my dear. I've been practicing medicine for 15 years, in some very challenging environments. I know what works and what doesn't. I've been practicing here for 6 years. I know these people, their needs, their situations." "Of course you do. And that knowledge will be invaluable. But surely you can see the wisdom in letting someone with more extensive training handle the more complex cases." Rebecca felt anger building in her chest like steam in a kettle. "Are you questioning my training?" "Not at all. I'm simply recognizing the natural strengths each of us brings to the practice. You have a wonderful bedside manner, excellent instincts for patient care. I have surgical experience and the physical stamina for more demanding cases." Physical stamina. There it was again, the assumption that being a woman automatically made her less capable of handling the difficult cases. "Dr. Hendricks," Rebecca said carefully, "I appreciate your desire to help, but this is my practice. I've built it from nothing, and I'm not prepared to simply hand over half of it to someone else." Dr. Hendricks' smile became cooler. "I understand your attachment to what you've built here, but surely you can see that the town needs more than one doctor can provide. We have an opportunity to create something really significant together. Under your leadership." "Under proper leadership, yes." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Rebecca realized this was the moment she had been heading toward ever since she'd decided to leave the cabin. The moment when she would have to choose between accepting the limitations others wanted to place on her life, fighting for something more. She thought about Caleb's words about running toward things that would never really satisfy her. She thought about the quiet mornings in the cabin, the sense of belonging she had felt there, the way Caleb had looked at her like she was someone worth knowing for herself, not just for what she could do. "Dr. Hendricks," she said slowly, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "How so?" "You seem to think I need your permission to run my practice the way I see fit. You seem to think that being a woman makes me less capable of handling difficult cases or making important decisions." Dr. Hendricks stood up, his face flushing. "I never said any such thing." "You didn't have to say it. You've been implying it since the moment you arrived at that cabin." Rebecca moved toward the door, opening it wide. "I think it's time for you to leave. Dr. Hayes, you're making a mistake. The people of this town need proper medical care, not some misguided attempt to prove a point. The people of this town have been getting proper medical care from me for 6 years. If they need additional help, I'll decide when and how to provide it." Dr. Hendricks gathered his coat and hat, his movements sharp with anger. "You're being very foolish, young lady. You can't run a proper practice alone, especially not the way you've been doing it. This town needs a real doctor." "Then I guess it's lucky they have one," Rebecca said, holding the door open. After he left, Rebecca sank into a chair and put her head in her hands. She had just made an enemy of the only other doctor within 50 miles, alienated the people who had come to rescue her, and probably confirmed every suspicion about female doctors being too emotional and difficult to work with. But for the first time since leaving the mountain cabin, she felt like herself again. The question now was what she was going to do about it. The first punch thrown in Murphy's saloon wasn't meant for Rebecca, but it landed her in the middle of the biggest fight Helena had seen in months. She had come to the saloon not for drinking, but because that's where injured miners always ended up after their shifts, and word had spread that someone needed a doctor. "Lady Doc thinks she's too good for help," slurred Pete Morrison, swaying on his bar stool with a bloody gash across his forehead. "Heard she sent that fancy city doctor packing like he was some kind of beggar. Maybe she likes rough mountain men better than civilized folks," added his drinking partner with a nasty laugh. Rebecca felt every conversation in the saloon stop as heads turned toward her. 3 weeks ago, she would have ignored the comments and focused on her patient. But 3 weeks ago felt like a lifetime, and the woman who had returned from the mountains wasn't willing to let insults slide. "Maybe I just prefer doctors who know the difference between helping and taking over," she said clearly, setting her medical bag on the bar with more force than necessary. The saloon went dead quiet, except for the sound of Pete Morrison's chair scraping as he stood up, his face ugly with drink and wounded pride. "You got something to say about the way things are done around here?" he demanded, moving closer. "I've got something to say about men who think being born male makes them experts on what women can and can't do," Rebecca replied, not backing down despite the fact that Morrison outweighed her by 50 pounds. That's when his friend decided to grab her arm, and that's when the real trouble started. Rebecca had learned a thing or two about defending herself during her years of traveling alone to remote locations. Her knee connected with the man's groin before he knew what hit him, and he doubled over with a howl of pain that seemed to serve as a signal for every drunk in the place to start swinging. Tables overturned, bottles flew, and Rebecca found herself pressed against the bar as chaos erupted around her. She was trying to figure out how to escape when a familiar voice cut through the noise. "That's enough." Sheriff Martinez waded into the fight, his gun drawn but pointed at the ceiling. Behind him came an unexpected figure, Caleb Thorne, looking completely out of place in the smoky saloon but moving with the quiet confidence that had kept him alive in grizzly country. "What the hell is he doing here?" Pete Morrison demanded, pointing at Caleb while blood ran down his face. "Same thing you should be doing," Caleb replied calmly, minding his own business. "This is our town, mountain man. We don't need outsiders telling us how to handle our women." The words were barely out of Morrison's mouth before he found himself flat on his back, Caleb standing over him with knuckles that hadn't even broken a sweat. "She's not your woman," Caleb said quietly. "She's not anybody's woman but her own." Rebecca stared at him, her heart hammering not from the fight but from the sight of him here, in her world, defending her when she hadn't even known she needed defending. "What are you doing in Helena?" she asked as Sheriff Martinez restored order and the other patrons began picking up overturned furniture. "Came to see you," Caleb said simply. "How did you know where to find me?" Asked around. "Bartender said you'd probably be wherever someone needed doctoring." He glanced around the saloon with raised eyebrows. Didn't expect it to be quite this exciting. Despite everything, Rebecca found herself smiling. "Welcome to my normal evening." "Your normal evenings include bar fights?" "My normal evenings include people who think they know what's best for me better than I do." Caleb nodded as if that explained everything. "We need to talk." "Dr. Hayes," Sheriff Martinez approached, holstering his gun. "You all right?" "I'm fine, Sheriff. Just treating a patient who got a little too much liquid courage with his medical care." "Maybe you should consider treating patients in your office from now on," the sheriff suggested. "Safer for everyone." "Maybe people should consider not telling me how to do my job," Rebecca shot back. Sheriff Martinez sighed. "Look, Doc, I know you're upset about the whole Dr. Hendricks situation, but starting fights in saloons isn't going to help your reputation any." "I didn't start anything. I just finished it." "That's not how it's going to look in the newspaper." Rebecca felt her stomach drop. The newspaper. Jenkins was here when the fight broke out, probably already writing up his story about the lady doctor who can't get along with civilized society. Rebecca closed her eyes, imagining the headlines. She could already see how the story would be told. The emotional female doctor who couldn't handle professional criticism and had to resort to violence when challenged. "Come on," Caleb said quietly, touching her elbow. "Let's get out of here." They walked in silence through the darkening streets of Helena, past houses where warm light glowed in windows and families gathered around dinner tables. Normal people living normal lives, not fighting in saloons or defending their right to exist in their chosen profession. "Why did you come?" Rebecca asked when they reached her house. "Because I couldn't stop thinking about what you said when you left." "What did I say?" "You said you had obligations, but you never said you were happy." Rebecca stopped walking and turned to face him. Even in the dim light from the street lamps, she could see the intensity in his dark eyes. "Happiness isn't the most important thing," she said. "Isn't it? What's the point of living if you're not happy? The point is helping people, making a difference, fulfilling your responsibilities. And are you making a difference?" Rebecca thought about the fight in the saloon, about Dr. Hendricks trying to take over her practice, about the way people looked at her now, not as a doctor they respected, but as a problem they didn't know how to solve. "I don't know," she admitted. "Rebecca, can I tell you something?" She nodded. "The day you left the cabin, Jeremiah said something that's been eating at me ever since." "What did he say?" "He said some people spend so much time proving they deserve to exist that they forget to actually live." The words hit Rebecca like a physical blow. She sank onto the steps of her front porch, suddenly exhausted by the weight of trying to be perfect, trying to be above criticism, trying to be everything to everyone. "I'm tired," she whispered. Caleb sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body in the cool evening air. "Of what?" "Of fighting. Of proving myself over and over again. Of being alone." She looked at him, seeing understanding in his face. "But I don't know how to be anything else." "Maybe you don't have to figure it out all at once." "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe you could start by figuring out what would make you happy right now, today. Not what you should do or what people expect, just what would make you happy." Rebecca considered the question seriously for the first time in years. What would make her happy? "I'd like to practice medicine the way I want to practice it," she said slowly. "I'd like to take care of people who really need help, not just the safe cases that won't upset anyone." "What else?" "I'd like to have someone in my life who sees me as more than just my job." "What else?" Rebecca looked at him. This man who had traveled down from the mountains to find her, who had defended her in a bar fight without being asked, who looked at her like she was worth the trouble. "I'd like to stop being so afraid," she whispered. "Afraid of what?" "Afraid that if I'm not perfect, if I'm not indispensable, if I'm not constantly proving my worth, then I'm nothing." Caleb reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against her cold ones. "Rebecca, you could quit doctoring tomorrow and move to China, and you'd still be worth knowing. You'd still be someone special." "How can you say that? You barely know me." "I know you well enough. I know you're brave and smart and kind. I know you make terrible coffee, but excellent conversation. I know you snore a little when you're really tired, and you talk to your horse like she's your best friend." Despite her emotional turmoil, Rebecca found herself laughing. I do not snore. Little bit. Very ladylike snoring. But definitely snoring. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, her hand still in his, watching the stars appear in the clear mountain sky. Caleb, she said finally. Yeah? What you said in the cabin about wanting things you thought you'd given up on forever. What did you mean? He was quiet for so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. I meant I want someone to come home to. Someone who chooses to be with me not because they need me to survive, but because they want to build something together. Someone who sees the life I've made and thinks it might be worth sharing, even though it's isolated, even though it's hard, especially because it's those things. Easy lives don't make people strong, Rebecca, and I don't want someone weak. Rebecca felt something shift inside her chest, like a door opening that had been locked for years. The town council is meeting tomorrow, she said suddenly. They're going to discuss my future here. Decide whether Helena really needs 2 doctors, or whether it might be better to have one reliable male physician instead of one problematic female one. And I think I'm done letting other people decide what my life should look like. Caleb squeezed her hand. What are you going to do? Rebecca stood up, pulling him with her. For the first time in weeks, she felt clear about something, certain about a choice she was making. I'm going to give them something to really talk about. As they walked toward her front door, Rebecca realized she wasn't afraid anymore. Not of the town council, not of Dr. Hendricks, not of starting over somewhere new with someone who made her feel like the best version of herself. The only thing she was afraid of now was waiting too long to grab hold of the happiness that was finally within reach. The town council meeting was standing room only, which Rebecca took as either a very good sign or a very bad one. She sat in the front row, her back straight and her hands folded in her lap, while behind her the entire population of Helena seemed to whisper and murmur about what was going to happen to their lady doctor. Order! Order! Mayor Thompson called, banging his gavel on the wooden table. We're here to discuss the medical situation in our community and determine the best path forward. Dr. Hendricks sat at a separate table, looking confident and professional in his dark suit. He had spent the past week making rounds, introducing himself to influential families, positioning himself as the steady, reliable alternative to Rebecca's increasingly problematic presence. Dr. Hendricks, Mayor Thompson continued, would you like to present your proposal first? Thank you, Mayor Thompson. Dr. Hendricks stood, his voice carrying easily through the packed room. Ladies and gentlemen, I come before you today with 15 years of medical experience and a simple proposition. Helena is growing, and it deserves medical care that meets the highest professional standards. Rebecca felt her jaw clench but forced herself to remain silent. Now I want to be clear, Dr. Hendricks continued. Dr. Hayes has done admirable work here under very challenging circumstances. But the recent incidents, her disappearance in the mountains, the unfortunate altercation at Murphy's saloon, that suggests that perhaps the strain of trying to serve this entire territory alone has become too much for one person to handle. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Rebecca could feel eyes on her, some sympathetic, others judgmental. I propose a partnership that would utilize both our strengths. I would handle the surgical cases, emergency calls, and any situations requiring travel to dangerous locations. Dr. Hayes could focus on women's health, pediatric care, and routine medical needs here in town. A division of labor that would serve everyone's best interests. And who would be the senior partner in this arrangement? Asked Councilmember Williams. Well, naturally, given my experience and training, I would need to take the lead in coordinating our efforts and making the more complex medical decisions. Rebecca had heard enough. She stood up, her heart pounding but her voice steady. May I respond to that proposal? Mayor Thompson looked uncomfortable. Dr. Hayes, we appreciate your willingness to cooperate with Dr. Hendricks' suggestions. I'm not here to cooperate with anything, Rebecca said clearly. I'm here to resign. The room erupted. People gasped, started talking at once, turned to their neighbors with shocked expressions. Mayor Thompson banged his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. Resign? Dr. Hendricks looked genuinely surprised. Dr. Hayes, surely we can work something out. There's no need for such a drastic step. There's every need, Rebecca replied. turning to face the crowd. I came to Helena 6 years ago because I wanted to practice medicine the way I believed it should be practiced. Going wherever I was needed, treating whoever required help, regardless of their social status or ability to pay. And you've done wonderful work, Mayor Thompson said diplomatically. Have I? Because listening to this conversation, it sounds like what I've done is create a problem that needs to be solved. It sounds like having a female doctor who doesn't know her place has become an embarrassment to this community. Now, Dr. Hayes, Councilmember Williams protested, nobody said anything about embarrassment, didn't they? Dr. Hendricks just told you I'm too unstable to handle the real doctoring. Last week, Sheriff Martinez suggested I should stick to treating patients in my office instead of going where they actually need help. And how many of you have spent the past month wondering when I was going to settle down and act like a proper lady instead of gallivanting around the mountains like some kind of wild woman? The silence that followed was answer enough. I see, Rebecca said quietly. Well then, I have good news for everyone. You don't have to worry about me anymore. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded paper. This is my formal resignation from the position of territorial physician for this district. Effective immediately. Dr. Hayes, Dr. Hendricks said, his voice conciliatory, please don't do anything hasty. We can find a way to work together that respects everyone's concerns. I'm sure you can, Rebecca replied, but I've realized something important over the past few weeks. I don't want to practice medicine in a place where I have to constantly justify my right to exist. She walked to the council table and placed her resignation letter in front of Mayor Thompson. I'll be leaving Helena within the week. Dr. Hendricks can have the practice, the patients, and the privilege of being the only doctor anyone has to worry about disappointing. Where will you go? Asked Mrs. Henderson from the back of the room. Rebecca turned to face the crowd, many of whom had been her patients, her neighbors, her community for 6 years. Some looked sad, others relieved, a few angry. I'm going where doctors are still allowed to practice medicine instead of politics, she said. I'm going where being brave is considered an asset instead of a problem. And where exactly is that? Dr. Hendricks asked with a slight sneer. The mountains, Rebecca said simply. There are mining camps up there, isolated families, people who need medical care and don't care whether their doctor wears pants or skirts, people who judge a physician by results, not by whether they conform to someone else's idea of proper behavior. The room buzzed with shocked conversation. Rebecca had just announced she was giving up civilization entirely, choosing the wilderness over proper society. Dr. Hayes, Mayor Thompson said desperately, surely you're not serious about this. A woman alone in the mountains, it's simply not safe or appropriate. You're right, Rebecca said with a smile that surprised her with its genuineness. A woman alone would be taking quite a risk. She walked to the back of the room, where Caleb Thorne stood leaning against the wall, his arms crossed and his face carefully neutral. He had been watching the entire proceedings with the patient stillness of someone who was used to waiting for the right moment to act. Fortunately, Rebecca continued, taking Caleb's hand, I won't be alone. The room erupted again, but this time Rebecca barely heard the noise. She was looking at Caleb, seeing the question in his dark eyes, the hope he was trying not to show. Rebecca, he said quietly, his voice almost lost in the commotion around them. Are you sure? I'm sure I want to practice medicine in a place where it matters more than politics. I'm sure I want to be with someone who sees my strength as an asset instead of a problem. I'm sure I'm tired of trying to fit into a life that was never the right size for me. And us? Are you sure about us? Rebecca looked around the room one more time, at the shocked faces, the disapproving frowns, the few sympathetic smiles. Then she looked back at Caleb, at this man who had traveled down from the mountains just to make sure she was happy. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Caleb's smile started slow but spread across his whole face like sunrise. In that case, Dr. Hayes, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? The proposal, delivered in front of half the town of Helena, caused such an uproar that Mayor Thompson gave up trying to maintain order. People were standing, shouting questions, expressing opinions about the wisdom of a civilized woman marrying a mountain man. Rebecca ignored all of it. She stood on her tiptoes, kissed Caleb firmly on the mouth and said, yes. As they walked out of the meeting hall together, hand in hand, Rebecca could hear Dr. Hendricks behind them, trying to restore some semblance of dignity to the proceedings. "Well," he was saying, "I suppose this solves the problem of too many doctors in one territory." "Yes," Rebecca called back over her shoulder, "it certainly does." Outside, in the clear mountain air, Caleb stopped walking and turned to face her. "No regrets?" he asked. Rebecca looked back at the building where the town council was probably still trying to figure out what had just happened. She thought about the practice she was giving up, the life she had worked so hard to build, the security she was walking away from. Then she thought about the mountains, where people needed a doctor who wasn't afraid to travel rough country or work in difficult conditions. She thought about building a life with someone who loved her strength instead of trying to contain it. "No regrets," she said firmly. "Just excitement about what comes next." 3 months later, the sign outside their mountain cabin read, "Dr. Rebecca Thorne, physician, no distance too far, no patient too remote." And every morning, as she prepared for whatever challenges the day might bring, Rebecca marveled at how right it felt to finally be exactly where she belonged. The mountains had taught her something the civilized world never could, that the best kind of life wasn't the safest or the most proper, but the one you built with courage, love, and the determination to be true to yourself no matter what anyone else thought. And in the end, that was the most healing medicine of all.